Hello, friends. Welcome back to Sorry What. Jason is here to bring you today's story. Make sure you're comfortable with a cup of your favorite drink and let us begin. Damn, I hate domestics. I witched to my partner, Jax, as we pulled up in front of the apartment complex. I'm with you, brother. Let's just get this over and done with, he responded. Almost all of the domestic disturbances I had handled in my 23 years on the police force ended quietly after a lot of yelling, threats and occasionally fists, but rarely any arrests. By the time the police are called, an argument between spouses has devolved into a fairly tense situation, but when we arrive, the combatants usually come to their senses and calm down. The dark blue uniforms and the thing we carry might play a part in it, I suspect. Every now and then, however, things go sideways, and the guys in the uniforms wind up being the bad guys to the fighting couple. I've been punched, shoved and bitten before at domestics. I'd almost rather face a Glengblinger brandishing a weapon. When we got to the door of the couple's apartment, a tall, pretty woman with a dark red bruise on the side of her face let us in. She told us her boyfriend was in the kitchen, so I left my partner of 15 years, Walter Jackson, with the woman, while I cautiously made my way to him. The man was standing with the refrigerator door open, sucking down a beer and looking somewhat disoriented. He had blood running down his face from a large cut above his right eyebrow. We were talking quietly for a minute or two when I felt a searing pain in my right deltoid almost at the same time I heard the shot. I look over to see the woman holding a small pistol and about to fire again when I heard a second blast, and the woman dropped to the floor lifeless. "You two okay?" Jax yelled out as he approached. "Oh, shit, Rain. You've been hit." I reached for my shoulder with my other hand and pulled back a handful of blood. "Duck, duck, duck," I muttered. 23 years on the force and the first bullet I take is at a domestic. My arm throbbed and was bleeding heavily, but since it hurt less than the time I broke it, I was hoping it didn't do too much bone damage, if any at all. The boyfriend got me a clean towel from a drawer, while Jax moved around the lifeless body of the woman and called it in. By the time paramedics arrived for me, the boyfriend and I were seated at the kitchen table, and I had done all the preliminaries for the call. As the paramedics got me stabilized for the trip to the emergency room, Jax came over to check on me. With everything that had happened, I had to admit my adrenaline level was through the roof, and I was incredibly thankful that Jax had saved my life. "Oh my god, Jax, am I glad you got her before she put a second bullet in me," I said. "You saved my behind, buddy. I owe you big time. Anything you ever need, I'm your man." Although Jax wound up saving my life, he got a 3-day rip for actually creating the situation. Seems he let the girlfriend go to the bathroom unescorted soon after we got to the scene, and she snuck out of the bathroom carrying a .22 pistol. It took about 2 months for me to return to active duty, since the small caliber bullet only nicked a bone, but when I got back, Jax was no longer my partner. He took his 25 years on the job and retired with his pension. I tried to talk him out of that, but he said he was fed up with all the bullshit and was done being police. Damn. He was a great partner in addition to being a close personal friend. 2 months later, he picked up and moved to California to become a writer. It was always a big deal when best-selling author Walter Jackson came back to town to visit. One of the television stations in town always wanted to catch up with a favorite son, and no matter where he went, people were always coming up to him for an autograph, often with one of his books in their hands for him to sign. It was a pretty big deal for my wife, Tracy, and me as well. Jax always stayed with us for the week or so he was in town, and I would usually take some vacation days, so we could have time to hang out, reminisce and drink. Both Tracy and I knew Jax long before we became partners on the Metro Police Department. In fact, the three of us had been friends since we were about 5 years old and lived on the same block. We were practically the Three Musketeers. Where you saw one of us, the other two were likely to be pretty close by. Tracy was a bit of a tomboy, so she was around with us when we played baseball and army, while the other girls in the neighborhood were off playing dolls and dress-up. Things got a little weird when we hit puberty. Tracy sprouted melons and her small bony peach suddenly filled out her jeans and shorts. Her mother thought it was inappropriate, so she had to stop playing football with the guys in the neighborhood, and pretty soon she was spending a lot more time with the other girls, huddled together, whispering and giggling. It got even weirder for me when I found out that Jax had asked Tracy to be his date for the 8th grade Valentine's dance. For several weeks leading up to the event, the two of them were doing a lot of whispering and giggling, then I found them kissing by Jax's locker in the school hallway. I suddenly became the odd man out. We were no longer the Three Musketeers, now it was two Musketeers and an outsider. At the very least, my feelings took a huge hit, especially when the two continued to be a couple after the dance. The two of them continued to date for the rest of 8th grade, and throughout most of 9th grade before Jax made the biggest mistake of his life. He got caught kissing Mary Lou Regan under the bleachers that spring. The news was all over Robert Frost High School before the next day was over, and Tracy was suddenly a free agent. I went from being almost in exile to being her comforting friend in the space of one day. I suppose it could be said I had no pride, but I jumped in to replace Jax and Tracy's heart in a nanosecond. I never interfered in the relationship between Tracy and Jax, but I wasn't going to hesitate for a second to lay claim to the prize that was Tracy Watson. Within a week, she was my girlfriend, and I wasn't a bit guilty about that. When Jax's infatuation with Mary Lou ended a month later, he tried to convince Tracy to go back to him, even though he knew she was with me. That was the only time he and I fought in all the years of our friendship. For her part, Tracy told him she was with me and had no interest in him anymore, and after a couple of weeks he seemed to accept her decision. He slowly worked his way back into our friendships over the course of the next 6 months. Jax was my best man when Tracy and I married 6 months after we graduated from Michigan State University. He had been on the police force for 2 years when I joined right out of school. 8 years later I was a sergeant and he was a detective when we were paired up as partners. I considered it a great partnership. Unfortunately for Jax, his partnership with women didn't last near as long as our union. His first marriage lasted only 3 years, and his second went only 5. Both ended because he cheated. You know me, Rain. I love variety. Just having one woman gets kind of old after a while, he told me one time while we were driving around town. Tracy's a wonderful woman, but I don't know how you've done it. Just one woman, wow. Despite his inability to hold on to a woman, Jax remained a good friend to both of us, and was also a really good uncle to our 2 children. He was always invited to our home for holidays and birthdays, and he vacationed with us a lot in the years he was unattached. All of us were sorry to see Jax head out to California, and we all looked forward to his visits back. The kids in particular were happy when he came to visit, because he always brought back great gifts for them, especially after he became a successful author. This time, Jax seemed a little reserved for the first 2 days after he got to our house. I figured I would give him a couple of days to come to me to talk before I approached him. I knew it was serious when he called me by my given name of Mason when he said we needed to talk. Do you remember when I shot that woman in the domestic and saved your life? He said quietly as the 2 of us sat in the family room watching TV, while Tracy prepared dinner in the kitchen one evening. How could I forget that? You bring it up every day when you visit us or we visit you, I said, chuckling over what had become a running joke. Well, I need to call in that favor you owe me, he said, leaning toward me from the chair in which he was sitting. I'm dying, Mason. For reals. Doc says I've got about a year left. Inoperable tumor in my brain. I looked hard into his eyes. Jax could be a great kidder, but I could tell by his eyes that he wasn't setting me up for a gotcha. What do you need from me? I said as seriously as I ever responded to anyone in my life. I want to take a final bucket list trip around the world, and I want to use my trip for a final book. I want to take Tracy with me to share my adventure and be my transcriptionist, he said. Wait a minute. It sounded like he was asking me if he could take my wife with him for a last trip around the world before he died. He couldn't seriously be asking me that, could he? You told me, anything you need. I'm your man. Remember that, he said. My head spun. My stomach felt like I'd been gut punched. You can't be serious, I whispered. I never promised you my wife. I couldn't and wouldn't promise her to anyone. I've already talked to her, Rain. She understands what this means to me, and she said she's in, Jax said quietly but seriously. No. I don't care what she said. You're not taking her with you. I promise you anything. That didn't mean anyone, I said. Don't be ridiculous. But you promised me, Jax whined. You promised me after I saved your life, that you would give me anything I asked for. I know this is a lot, but I've only got a year. After that, I'll be dead and she can be yours forever. Did you hear yourself? I promised you anything. Not anybody. And I'm not giving you my wife for a year. I'm sorry you're dying, but I'm not pimping my wife out for a year to you. Or anybody, I said, my voice rising in volume. You promised him, Rain, regardless of how you want to spin it. And since he's dying, I'm going to honor that promise, Tracy said, standing in the opening to the room with her hands on her hips. I looked up into the glowing mad eyes of my wife. This still wasn't going to happen. He's asking me to give you up for a year. I never anticipated anything like this. Nobody could have anticipated anything like this. But I never promised him anybody, I argued with Tracy. I'm not going to let you do it. You don't own me. I'm going. Tracy practically shouted at me before walking out of the room. Why did you save my life if you were going to destroy it later? I asked Jax. I'm not destroying your life, Rain, he responded. I've always loved Tracy. I should never have let her go all those years ago. She would get to share my final adventure. You know I'd treat her right. And then with me gone, you'd know she was all yours again. Completely. I can't do that, Jax. I'm not giving you my wife for a year. Even if you're going to be dead after. As it is, if you weren't dying and had asked me that, I'd kill you, I snarled. You know me as well as anybody in the world, Jax. Why would you even think I would let you borrow Tracy for a year? Because I do know you better than anybody, Rain. You know I'd take care of her and I'd respect her. I'd never impose myself enough to make her do something degrading or something that she didn't want to do. Then I'd be gone. Forever. And not be concerned that I'd be back chasing after her in the future, he said in a manner that was way more businesslike than I expected. Not that his tone would influence my decision in any way. With your money, Jax, why don't you just take a high-priced escort or a B-list starlet? I asked. You're not getting it, Rain. I'm dying. Dying. This is it for me. I want to make my last hurrah a real hurrah, Jax asserted. I missed my chance at Tracy all those years ago, but she's always been the woman I've wanted. She's willing. Let me have this last ask. I know it's a big one, a huge one. It would stay between Tracy, you and me. No one would ever have to know. I would know, Jax. That's not who I am. I love you like a brother, but I can't give you my wife. Bro, I'm not sure you're in control of the situation, he said. I knew I wasn't in control of the situation, but surely Tracy would see things my way when I had a chance to talk with her. She and Jax had apparently talked behind my back, which didn't make me happy, but surely she would be reasonable, wouldn't she? Tracy announced dinner was ready about 10 minutes later. She and Jax ate heartily and were jovial dinner companions. All for my benefit, I'm sure. Well, I felt like I was eating my last meal before heading to the gallows. The two continued their jocularity throughout the evening, while I pretended to be more interested in whatever was on television. Jax tried to invite me into their conversation several times, but I wasn't going to be sidetracked from my gloom. Finally, at about 9 p.m., Tracy announced she was ready for bed, which was her hint to me that it was time to talk. Tracy was already in bed when I walked into the room. We always slept in her birthday suit, but when she started patting the bed, I knew she was thinking that she'd duck me into the mattress to help me see things her way. I kept my clothes on and sank down into the chair in the room. Nice try, babe, but I'm doing this with my big brain, I said. She harrumed, but said nothing for about a minute. He's dying, Rain. He's our oldest friend and he's dying. I'm going to give this to him, Tracy said, her blue eyes blazing with defiance. You're going to give this to him? I responded. As your husband, don't you think it's a wee decision? I asked. It's my body, and it's my decision alone. You don't get a say in this, she started. The vows are ours, Tracy, I interrupted. The vows that you will be willfully breaking are ours. Don't you think that gives me a say? She colored brightly and dropped her eyes to the bed, telling me she wasn't prepared for that argument. I have never cheated on you, Rain. Never even considered it. But this is different. He's dying and he's our oldest friend. It wouldn't be love. It would be me giving my body to comfort our oldest friend in his dying months, she reasoned. So now you're Florence ducking Nightingale. Literally. That's pathetic, babe. I yelled. Are you going to start ducking every dying friend in the future? She growled at me before taking a deep breath and re-engaging. I can comfort him and help him with his last book. I am going to do this, with or without your permission. We can sort this out after he's gone, she said. That was exactly what I figured. There was no discussion. She had made up her mind for both of us. All that was left were the tears. What about the kids? I asked. What about the kids? They don't need to know anything other than I'm off helping Uncle Jax, she said sharply. Are you ducking kidding me? I practically shouted. Neither of our kids are stupid. They're going to think I'm the biggest puss in the world, letting their mother go off on a worldwide frolic with our closest friend. It's bad enough you disrespect me enough to do this. I'm not letting them think I'm the biggest cluckle this side of the Rockies. I will tell them the truth and let them sort things out. You can't do that. They will think I'm a slut. What would you call a woman who runs off on a year-long jaunt with a man who is not her husband? I asked. But this is different. He's dying. I would be comforting him, she claimed. Call it what you want. If you do this, I'll be calling you a slut, plain and simple, I said. You did promise him anything, she said. Nice try. I promised him anything. Not anyone, I said. But that tells me you two have talked about this a lot, and I'm on the outside looking in. Do what you feel you need to do, babe, but remember that actions have consequences attached to them, I added. I tried again with Jax the next day. Bro, we've been friends for like 50 years. Don't do this to me, to Tracy, I said. It will be okay, Ring. She doesn't love me the way she loves you, Jack said. You're her husband. I'm only a friend. She loves me like a friend, a good friend, but that's way less than she loves you. She'll come back to you completely. I'll be nothing but a memory. Hopefully a good memory, but just a memory. But what if I'm not here when she comes back? I asked. You wouldn't be stupid enough to not be here for her when she comes back, Jax answered without even hesitating. You love her. You guys have been married forever. This won't be very long. I'll be gone. Dead. And she'll be yours again. Just give me this, Ring, please. I shook my head, got up and walked away. We had barely started eating dinner that night when she started in on me at the dinner table, with Jack sitting right there. I guess she figured since I wasn't going to let her duck me into agreeing with their plan, they could double team me in an argument at the table. There's not going to be a divorce, Ring, Tracy said. You love me. I know it and you do, too. I love you, and you know that, too. And Jax is our oldest friend and he's dying. We're going to do this for him. I can't promise that, Tracy. I'm not on board with this. At all, I said. We had several more discussions like that the next 2 days. On the third day, a limousine showed up in our driveway, and both Jax and Tracy came downstairs carrying 2 suitcases each. I did offer to help with the luggage. So this is how it's going to be, huh? I asked. My wife and my best friend play house all over the world, and I'm just supposed to wait here like the dutiful cuckold husband. I guess maybe if I'm lucky you'll die earlier than expected. Jax winced at that. My wife glowered. I never expected you to be so petty and mean, she cried. And I never expected you to be a whore, and you a predator, I said, turning from Tracy to Jax. She pursed her lips and looked like she wanted to reply, but Jax looked at her and shook his head. It doesn't have to be this way, Ring, Tracy said. Yes, it does, I responded in little more than a whisper. On that note, she followed Jax out the door. Tracy and I had never left each other without a kiss goodbye until that moment. Now she was leaving for about a year to be the wife, companion, whore, secretary, caretaker for my former best friend, and I didn't even get a peck on the lips. I guess this showed me exactly where I stood these days. Remember the war on drugs from the 1960s? Well, in case you haven't been paying attention, we lost that. So legislators decided to surrender to the enemy. We keep making more and more things legal, but it still doesn't stop much of the drug-related crime. We were on the verge of making a big cocaine bust, which would slow that traffic considerably in our region for a while, so I was pretty busy for the next week at work. With nobody waiting for me at home, I was able to work as much as I wanted or needed, which kept me from brooding about Tracy going off with Jax. It had been 5 days since the two left, and I hadn't heard word one from my wayward wife. To be fair, I hadn't called or texted her either, but again, I'm not the one who left. Hey, Dad, how are you doing? My daughter Stella asked when she called me while I was watching television that evening. Do you miss Mom yet? No, baby, I don't miss your mother as such, but I do miss having someone else here with me in the evenings. I'm thinking of getting a dog for company, I responded. Do you think she'll be gone a year? Do you think Uncle Jax has that long? She queried. At this point, he could die tomorrow for all I care, and at this point it still wouldn't help our marriage. Wait, what? Are you talking divorce? But Mom said you gave her permission to help Uncle Jax, Stella cried. Really? That's what she told you? I queried. Come on, Stell, you know me better than that. I wouldn't let my wife run off to play house with Uncle Jax for even 3 days, let alone a year. Why you think she's going to sleep with him? I thought she was just going to be helping him with his book and with his medications and stuff, you know, like a girl Friday, she said. I had to admit I was shocked at how naive my 32-year-old daughter was. He didn't need your mother to babysit him to take notes and parse his medications, Stell. Get real, I said. There was silence on the other end of the line for a good 10 seconds before she finally whispered, yeah, right. I'm sorry, Dad. Me too, baby. Me too, I whispered back. 2 days later I got my first call from my wife, and it wasn't just a happy catch-up call. You bastard. You told our daughter that I'm a slut. She yelled at me over the line. I'm fine, Tracy. I'm getting along okay without you. Hopefully you're enjoying your trip, I said pointedly. I heard her take in a deep breath. That was one of her tells when she was pissed off, but she knew she was in the wrong. How are you really? She asked in an exasperated tone. Are you eating all right, taking care of yourself? Thank you for the pleasantries, but you know you don't care one bit about me. Now, what's got your panties in a bunch? I asked. You told our daughter I'm a slut. How could you do that, Ring? She asked. I didn't tell our daughter you were a slut, I answered. I told her the truth of what you were doing with Jax, after you most definitely lied to her. I didn't lie to her, Tracy interrupted. I just didn't tell her everything. A rose by any other name Tracy. A lie of omission is still a lie, I pointed out. I expected the silence I got. Look, Trace, well, I'm not going to be shouting out your activities to the world. I'm also not going to lie for you, especially to our kids. If you feel guilty about what you're doing, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it, I said. Great. Now you're my conscience as well as my husband, she snarked. Well, I'm sure we can drop one of those titles fairly quickly, I snarked back. We discussed this. No divorce, Tracy said. No, you talked. I listened. Not a discussion, I said. I didn't hear any response or any noise at all, so I assumed she disconnected the call. That's one of the biggest drawbacks to cell phones, I thought. The next night I got a surprise phone call from my former best friend. I thought about not answering the call at all when I saw who it was, but I hit record and answered. Come on, Rain, you know you didn't have to do that to Tracy, he started when I answered. Like you're in any position to lecture me, duckhead. You didn't have to steal my wife, I responded quietly, doing everything I could to hold my temper in check. But since you did, she should have had the stones to tell Stella the truth. The whole truth, not a sanitized version to make herself look good. She's a slut, any way you want to slice it, Jax, and you're the sleaze who helped turn her into that. I heard the heavy sigh. What part of I'm dying don't you get? I wouldn't be here a year from now, and you two will be sitting together cuddling on your sofa, probably not even remembering your old pal, he said. I'm not stealing her. I'm just borrowing her for a bit while I do a final bucket list trip around the world. Would you deny her that trip, which I know you can't afford? He asked. Yes, I would, because I'm a selfish bastard. She's my wife, and if I can't afford to take her on an around the world trip, she doesn't get to whore herself out to get it, I said. When did you turn into such a whiny, righteous little witch? He asked. Good night, Jax. 2 nights later I got a text from my wife. It was a photo of her in a skimpy bikini with a deep tan and a frothy drink in her hand. I skimmed the accompanying text and found out she enjoyed her time on the beaches of Portugal and Spain. She told me she would try to keep me updated on her great adventure. How magnanimous of her, I thought. I didn't respond back. She apparently texted our kids as well, because they both mentioned receiving photos from her in the phone calls I got the next day. Stella, at least, had the good grace to sound a little upset when we talked. You get to meet quite a few people from a variety of fields as a police officer, including a lot of attorneys. Honestly, I don't have as big a problem with them as most people do, although I have a great cache of attorney jokes. Attorneys, like journalists, are necessary evils, but are best kept at arm's length if possible. At that moment in my life, though, I needed a good attorney, so I called my buddy the prosecuting attorney, and asked whom he used as his attorney when he got divorced. Tuella Cares was probably a serious fox in her day, because she was still a goddess in her early 60s. She was wearing a fairly form-fitting black sweater dress at our first meeting, and I have to admit that my concentration was probably not as focused as it could have been. I at least was able to keep myself from staring at the gold necklace that was draped around her neck, and dipped fairly close to the opening of her somewhat low-cut front. Her steel blue eyes practically glowed in their sockets as she reached forward to shake my hand with a firm grip. Alex Middleton said you're a good man, so that earns you a couple of rungs up the ladder, she said as she directed me to a seat at the wooden table in her large office. How can I be of assistance? To avoid any chance of embarrassing myself by drooling over her body, I kept my focus completely on her intense eyes, as I laid out my tale of woe. She took notes and looked at me sympathetically several times as I talked. So there's no kids in the mix for either of you to worry about? She asked. Nah, growing it out on their own. It's just the two of us now. Well, I guess just the one of me, I said, more than a little self-conscious. I never saw anything like this happening. I love her with every fiber of my being and she left with him. I don't care that he's dying. She's my wife and I don't feel one bit of guilt over this. We made vows to each other, and I'm pretty sure there wasn't a timeout clause in there for dying friends, I commented. I told Ms. Cares I wanted Tracy served as soon as possible. I could see the wheels turning in her head as she looked at me. She told me without having an agenda for the two, having her served somewhere in the world would be extremely difficult and very expensive. I need to do some checking on things, but I'm thinking that you need to slow down and let things happen much more organically. The courts won't do anything while she's out of the country, so you've got plenty of time to have her served. In fact, I'd recommend you not do that until she comes back home. I have to admit to being puzzled by her laissez-faire attitude, but I noted that she looked every bit the shark when she smiled, and I got a sudden chill at how cold her eyes got as she scribbled some notes down on her pad. The kids and I continued to get occasional texts and photos from Tracy from different places. I looked at them but never responded back. I knew the kids had started corresponding back with Tracy, but mostly kept their texting to themselves, trying to keep my pain to a minimum. I'll admit that I felt both were betraying me, but in truth Tracy was still their mother, and I guessed them keeping in touch with her was the right thing for them. Of course I assumed Tracy was sending texts and photos to me to try to keep our connection, but sending photos showing her and Jax looking like a happily married couple was the exact wrong thing to do. Photos of the two of them with their arms around each other, hugging closer, her sitting on his lap smiling, did nothing to make me feel closer to or more forgiving of my wife. I also noticed that Tracy was now wearing different rings on her left hand than the engagement and wedding rings I had given her all those years before. I first noticed that on a photo of the two of them sitting together on a chair, with Tracy holding a flute of champagne in her left hand. Of course I enlarged the photo enough to see it, and proceeded to spend the next 5 minutes howling in rage to the four walls of the room in which I was sitting. It was probably a good thing neither she nor Jax was actually in front of me, or I might have ended up in jail. Every blue moon Tracy would call and leave a message, as would Jax. They both kept up the mantra that Tracy's time with him was special, and she would return to me completely when Jax was gone. Way too late, I always muttered to myself when I heard those messages. My younger daughter, Lori, called in tears one afternoon while I was on duty. I was sitting in a Dunkin' with a hot cup of coffee and 2 donuts when I got the call. Yeah, that thing about cops and donuts is a cliche for a reason. Anyway, it seemed that Uncle Jax's health had started to go downhill noticeably, and Tracy had been calling the girls to keep them updated and also to vent, since the person she usually would have vented to was also the one who threatened to divorce her cheating peach. Mom called and said Uncle Jax is probably down to his final few weeks. They're probably going to stop their world tour soon and hunker down in a big city with a good hospital, maybe someplace that would have hospice care, Lori sobbed. Mom was in tears. She wanted to know if we could jump on a plane and meet them when they pick a hospital. Uncle Jax will pay for the tickets. We're the closest thing he has to a family, you know. Once upon a time, babe, we were that close, but those days left when your mother left with Jax. That we you talk about won't be including me, I said. You can't be serious, Dad. Lori wailed. He's your best friend. You two have been friends forever. He's Mom's best friend, too. You can't be that vengeful. Watch me, I said. You do know that Mom's been sleeping with Uncle Jax the whole time they've been on this trip. Yes, Dad, Stella told me soon after they left. I guess you told Stella, Lori said. And that doesn't bother you? Your mother having sex with Uncle Jax? I squeaked, my voice breaking. There was silence on the other end of the call, except for Lori softly crying. Your mother, my wife, has been having sex with the guy who was my best friend for the entire trip. They both disrespected me because they wanted to, using the he's dying excuse as their justification. She never had my assent, my permission, whatever you want to call it, to violate our wedding vows. End of story. Damn, Dad. That's flat out cold, my daughter asserted. Needless to say, I didn't go with my daughters when Tracy called them a week later to say Jax was in a hospital in Japan for his final days. 6 days later, Stella called me to tell me he was dead, and my family and his body would be back in the United States in 2 days. As Jax already had arrangements made, the funeral was set for 2 days after they got back. I was more than a little disturbed with my attorney's laid-back attitude about the divorce filing when I called to tell her my wife was returning home. Do you trust me, Rain? She asked. If you do, listen to me. Do not file papers against your wife until after the reading of Jax's will. I don't want any of that Ducker's money. I started to yell, before she interrupted. I know you don't, Rain, she said calmly. But you want revenge and I can get you that. Do you trust me? I didn't understand everything going on in that woman's sharp mind, but I trusted her for some reason. I guess time would tell. I met the family at the airport. I gave hugs to my girls, but stopped Tracy dead in her tracks with my stiff arm when she tried to hug me. Oof, she said when she ran into my hand. Rain, we haven't seen each other in more than 11 months. You can't be that cold, can you? She asked with tears in her eyes. I can be that cold. I watched my wife walk out the door with another man to have sex with him for a year or so until he died, I growled. Are you still on that? She whined. It was just sex with a good friend. I didn't love him like I love you. I comforted him. He was dying, you bastard. You just keep telling yourself that, you delusional witch, I responded. The funeral and burial were done locally. Because Jax was a 25-year member of our police force, the guys turned out in force, and he got full burial honors. The local press was all over it, and there were even a couple of national news crews around. Our chief of police, Rob Guilford, was overwhelmed by the press guys looking for a story, so he asked me as Jax's former partner to step up and handle the press and any requests they had. I turned him down flat and then told him the reason. Only one other person on the force knew of my wife's betrayal, so Rob was almost as devastated as me when I told him. "I'm really sorry, Ring. I didn't know. I wouldn't have asked if I knew," Rob said. "I know, boss. I'd appreciate it if you could keep this on the down low for a little while. I will be filing for divorce very soon," I said. "I'm surprised you haven't done that already," he remarked. "I'm also surprised you didn't put a bullet in your ex-partner and your wife. You're not one of those who likes that kind of thing, are you?" he asked, looking sheepish. "No, but I'm also not one of those who wants to play drop the soap in the showers in prison. Ex-cops don't usually do well inside, you know," I responded. Still, it fell to me as his ex-partner to do the eulogy. I know that made my wife very nervous, imagining what I might say. Several times while I sat at my desk at home working on my speech, Tracy was lurking in the background. "Don't worry, Trace, I'm not going to give you two up for the scum you became," I rasped. "Not for him or you, but for the guys. They don't need to be drawn into your web of questionable behavior." Her eyes flashed anger, but she figured out it was to her advantage not to piss me off more than I already was, and she would walk away. The post-funeral luncheon was held in the local pal club. There were several of those big photos of Jack scattered around the room on easels, most from his police days, but a few from his time as a successful writer and celebrity. Tracy wanted to use a photo of Jack's that she shot while he was writing at his computer during their trip, but I vetoed that out of hand. "Unless you've told a bunch of your friends about your adventure, only 2 people on the force know that you're a reprehensible whore, and neither one will out you out of respect for me. You made me cuckold. You're not going to make me a pathetic wimp as well," I declared. Tracy and the girls were appalled when I told her she was bunking in our guest room when we got home. I had moved all her clothes out of the master bedroom a week after she left. They all protested for a few minutes, until I threatened to drop all of them off at a rest stop. "I've been living alone for just about a whole year now, since my loving wife left me for another man," I said. "My loving daughters came by for a couple of days, but it's pretty much been me alone. I come and go as I please. Live my life as I want. You live your life as a globe-trotting slut. Well, welcome back to the real world." "How can we reconnect if we're not even sleeping together?" Tracy wailed. "We're supposed to reconnect and get back to where we were." "Yeah, so you keep saying, but I can't believe after all this time you didn't know me enough to know that wasn't ever going to happen. You blew up our marriage. You slotted with another man." "Uncle Jax was dying," Dad Stella started to say before I interrupted. "Have either of you girls told your husbands exactly what your mother was doing on her year-long hiatus from our marriage?" I asked sharply. Hearing no response, I continued. "Why not, girls? Because you know your husbands wouldn't approve. Because there's no way either of them would let either of you do what your mother did. Why is it okay for my wife to be Slicilla, but not their wives?" We drove in silence for most of the rest of the way, until I told Tracy about the new sleeping arrangements. The girls went back to their husbands a few days after Jax's funeral. The house got as quiet as it was when I was by myself. I had gotten used to the silence when I was by myself, so I didn't feel the need to break my routine now that Tracy was back home, especially since I didn't have anything productive to say to her. I also continued to make my own meals and didn't partake when Tracy cooked. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she screamed 5 days later when I ignored her call to dinner yet again. "Yeah, I'm pretty sure I said that a few times, too, after you walked out on me to enjoy your Slot World tour. And before you say it again, yes, I know he was dying. So ducking what? It didn't give either one of you the right to do what you did. It was just a cheap excuse for you two to duck around openly. Stop trying to make it sound like you did something noble. There was nothing noble about you spreading your legs for Jax." It wasn't lost on me that Tracy had never apologized for her infidelity. I knew she felt no remorse at all for the act. Hell, she didn't even apologize for hurting me with her betrayal. Could she really be this delusional, this self-centered? Almost a year traveling the globe with another man gave me all the answers I needed. Because Jax had no close family and knew he was dying, he had his estate set up and his will ready to go at the time of his death. The reading was set for just 3 weeks after the funeral, and the only ones who got special invitations were my family members. I figured we, or at least Tracy and the girls, would probably inherit the bulk of his estate, which I guessed to be several $1,000,000. As I told my attorney, I didn't want any of his money, because I felt Tracy earned it on her back. Still, she told me to attend the reading and keep my mouth shut, regardless of what transpired. "Promise me, Ring. Promise me you won't say a disparaging word to anyone at the reading." Anything you have to say, you can say to me at our appointment the day after, Twyla said. I promise. Unhappily, but I promised. The kids had come back home for the reading of the will, so we had a full house with the spouses and the grandkids. Tracy accurately pointed out that it would be much more comfortable if she could move back into my bedroom and give the guest room to the grandkids, but I vetoed that immediately. There was no way she was going to get the chance to try to duck me into letting her back in my life. At the reading, I wasn't surprised when Jax left $1 million trust fund to each of my girls. They regarded him as an uncle, and he had always been very good to them through the years. He also left $1 million to our community's United Way, and another $1 million to St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. There were several smaller bequests, and I could see Tracy practically twitching in anticipation as each bequest was announced. The attorney for the estate then announced that the next bequest was for the remainder of Jax's estate. $8.4 million in his home near Sacramento. And it went to me. Tracy squealed in delight while I sat at the conference table in shock. I started to say something, but somehow was able to remember the promise I made to Twyla and kept my mouth shut. Tracy stood up and moved to hug me, but stopped when she saw my glare. The lawyer interrupted our non-moment by almost forcing an envelope into my hand. I tried to pull my hands back, but he would have none of that. You really need to read this, Mr. Rainwater. It might make you feel different about some things, he said. The kids were smashing me in hugs and tears. My two sons-in-law were grinning like Cheshire cats. Tracy was smiling from ear to ear. I felt like I was living in a bad dream. I knew I had to say something, so I invited everyone to dinner, on the newly minted millionaire, of course. I sat at the table mostly quiet during the meal. I'm not sure anybody really cared what I had to say. Everybody seemed happy enough. The meeting with Twyla was eye-opening, to say the least. Like Tracy had done the day before, Twyla squealed when I told her that Jax bequeathed most of his millions to me. To you? Not you and Tracy? Twyla asked, suddenly serious as a heart attack. Yeah, just me. What difference does that make? Everything I have is hers, and everything she has is mine, right? I asked. Not quite. Even though you are married, the bequest was made specifically to you. So you, not you and your wife, have complete control of this money. She started. Wait, I interrupted. Are you telling me that I can decide, just me, what to do with this money? Exactly. And since you said you don't want to keep the money, you can give the money away. But remember, you have to pay taxes on it first. Remember, I told you not to file for divorce for a bit. This is the reason why. You can give the money away. But if you would have filed for divorce, the money would be included in your assets, and be split down the middle. So, pay your taxes, donate the money, and 6 months from now file for divorce. You will have to split whatever assets you have then, but the bequest will be long gone. Sounds like a plan, Twyla said with a coquettish smile. Oh, and did you know there's a fund held by a private group within the state that helps out the widows and children of police officers who are killed in the line of duty? Genius. Pure genius, I said in true amazement. Yeah, and maybe you take your own vacation trip, so no one can find you until you have her served. Sell the house, pay the taxes and use that money to fund your vacay, she said. How did you know that he'd leave the ball to me, and not both of us? I asked. I didn't, but it seemed logical to me, based on what you had said about him. I figured he'd feel so guilty to you that he'd leave the money to you solo as a gesture, figuring that you'd split it with your wife in the divorce he knew was coming, Twyla crowed. He never figured you'd have the intelligence nor the patience to get this done. I got it done alright, but very quietly, thanks to Twyla and a tax expert she used. A couple of weeks later, as I was walking back into the house after another day of work, I caught Tracy looking at her phone and crying while thumbing through photos, apparently lost in grief. I shouldn't have been surprised that she would have a treasure trove of photos from her adventure. After all, she had sent me and the girls a bunch throughout the year. I pretended not to notice and went upstairs to change my clothes, but another plan was germinating inside my head. My wife was like a 15-year-old girl with her phone. She was constantly on it and it was never out of her sight, except when she showered, which she did every evening before she went to bed. That night, as soon as I heard the shower running, I went into the guest room and took her phone. I have to admit I was surprised it wasn't password protected. I then went into her Photos app and deleted everything, chuckling to myself like a spiteful witch. I was still chuckling a few minutes later in the family room when I deleted all her trip photos in the cloud as well. Just as I was finishing up, Tracy came into the room, a towel wrapped around her wet hair. As usual, I didn't greet her. We rarely talked, except when we were exchanging information. Not that she didn't try to talk to me. What's so funny, Rain? She asked. You watching another rerun of The Office? Cat memes, I responded, clicking on the screen I had hidden and enlarging it. I turned the screen quickly in her direction, then turned it back to myself. Trust me, I knew I was being childish, but hell hath no fury like a man cheated on. I may not have been a screaming lunatic like some people, but I bleed the same as anybody else when I'm cut. I suppose I should have expected it, but 2 nights later, I walked in the door to the mother of all hurricanes in my house. You son of a witch motherdicker. She screamed at me as I crossed the threshold into the house from the garage. I can't believe you did that. All my photos. Every single photo of Jax and me. Tell me you've got them backed up and hidden somewhere. Please. I looked at her tear-streaked, distraught face. You would have thought Jax had died all over again. You told me that when he was gone, he wouldn't be a factor in our lives, yet you're constantly looking at his photos, reliving your adventure. I've looked at every single photo you had. That was a hell of a lot more than just comfort you were providing my former best friend, I asserted. But he's gone now. I can never get those pictures back, you petty bastard, she cried. I shrugged nonchalantly. Truthfully, I didn't give a shit. You don't get to be the arbiter of petty, I said quietly. Tracy spent the next 2 days growling at me. At no time did I turn my back to her, actually fearing for my safety. I made sure to lock my bedroom door at night, and anytime I wasn't actually in the room. Tracy always went grocery shopping on Saturday mornings. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking a cup of coffee when she left, neither one of us having said anything up until that point in the day. She wasn't gone 5 minutes when I called an Uber and brought a large suitcase and a carry-on downstairs. I had thought long and hard about what I was going to say to her in the note I was going to leave, but in the end I didn't have the words to say anything more than duck you, so I decided not to leave any note. I figured she would catch on sometime later that day when I didn't show up back home. She finally caught on about 9 p.m, at least that's when the first call came in. I found 3 more calls also came in when I turned my phone back on when I got to Lisbon, Portugal. I also found 1 call each from my daughters. I listened to the messages but did not return any of the calls. Hey, I was on vacation. Since Tracy had not gone back to work after her sabbatical trip, I knew she would be at the house Monday morning, when the process server made his or her appearance. In the previous 6 months I had done all the cliché divorce things like separating our finances and cancelling our joint credit cards. That would still give her more than enough to live on for up to a year, provided she didn't do something stupid like buy a Lamborghini. I got the phone call from Twyla at about 4 p.m. Lisbon time. I was sitting in a small cafe enjoying a dry red wine and 2 types of cheese when my phone rang. According to my server, she didn't take things very well, Twyla said after we finished with our pleasantries. She especially didn't take it well that you filed for adultery, even though it doesn't make a difference for the settlement. The photos of the 2 of them doing adulterous type activities shook her pretty badly, my server said. Did you email those to my daughters as well, and separately to my sons-in-law like we discussed? I asked. For some reason, my girls seemed to think her having sex with Jax was a mission of mercy. I wanted to make sure that they saw her being very merciful. And I wanted to make sure that my sons-in-law got to see what their wives consider merciful. There should be some really interesting discussions going on at those houses tonight. I did as my client instructed, with the appropriate wording, Twyla said. Thank you, I said quietly. I'm not proud of doing that, but I'm tired of being called the bad guy. She cheated, yet somehow I'm the bad guy. I was deeply tanned and well rested when I stepped back into my house 8 weeks later. Tracy came running into the kitchen, then stopped abruptly when she saw my face. No, this was not going to be the happy reunion for which she had hoped. I don't know about you, but I really liked Portugal and the south of France best, I said. But I suppose I might have enjoyed all of it more if I had brought along a duck buddy like you did. She glared at me, then scrunched up her nose like she smelled something rank. Are you finally over yourself? She barked. Now can we stop this nonsense and get back to us? You know I'll do anything to make it up to you. Why in God's name would I want to get back to us? That apparently wasn't very good if you could just pick up and go off with another man for almost a year, I said. He was dying. He was our best friend. It was the least I could do to comfort him, she said, her voice rising in pitch and volume. This tired argument has lived longer than Jack's. Just because he was dying was no reason for you to unilaterally decide to duck him for a year. You were my wife. We made vows. You don't own my body. I do. I say who gets it and when, she screeched. Wrong. We owned each other's bodies when we made vows forsaking all others, I said. She tried to fight the divorce, eventually getting an attorney. The first thing her attorney did was ask for an accounting of all our assets, together and individually. It took 1 day for her attorney to call Twyla and ask where I was hiding the money Jax had left to me, my attorney reported to me. That money's been gone for months, Mr. Robertson. My client didn't want to be enriched by money his wife earned by prostituting herself, so after paying taxes, he donated the money to the State Police Widows and Orphans Fund, Twyla said she told him. He can't do that, Tracy's lawyer yelled. That money belonged to both of them. He just can't spend it willy-nilly. Actually, both of them had access to their joint account at the time, but the biggest thing to consider was the fact that the money was left directly to my client, and not to both my client and his wife as a marital unit. I suppose she has the right to contest this, but considering it's been in the account of the charity for over half a year, she's going to look like a real-life, the Grinch who stole Christmas, Twyla said. The charity's attorneys looked carefully at this before accepting the gift. And we won't hesitate to go to the press with this. My phone started blowing up about an hour after Twyla called to tell me about her attorney inquiring about the money. I hadn't been answering any of her attempts to contact me since she first went off on her adventure, and I didn't see any reason to change my policy. My kids started calling soon after that, and although I knew what the calls were about, I still answered. Holy shit, Dad, you surely didn't give away all of Uncle Jax's money, did you? Seriously? Stella half-asked, half-screamed into the phone. I surely did, Stell, I answered brightly. The people from the fund were absolutely thrilled. And I felt that Jax would have been pleased with the donation, as well. But Dad, you know he would have wanted Mom to have some of that money. He loved Mom, Stella wailed. And there's the rub, baby. He loved my wife and she loved him back. My wife. I guess you are allowed to love whoever you want, but you have to know when you love another person's spouse, things could go awry. And as for her, I was the only one she should have loved that way. She crossed the line. She disrespected me. Why do I keep having to explain this? I said. I had moved into an apartment a couple of days after I got back from vacation, knowing that the sheet was going to hit the fan as soon as she figured out I had spent Jax's money. That proved to be a wise decision. Word got out about my donating the money after that. Most of my friends on the force thought I had lost my mind. I spent a lot of time explaining my thoughts to the guys, as well as others when they asked me about it. I was surprised that so many people felt they had a right to express their opinions to me about how I spent my money. Because of that, I didn't go out much socially after I got back. My life had devolved into work and home. My girls didn't visit at all, being upset with me for filing on Tracy and giving away Jax's money, but I did get visited occasionally by my sons-in-law. Lori's husband, Grant, was visiting me on the sly, but Stella's husband, Abel, flat out told my daughter that he wasn't going to abandon me because Tracy was a slut. He told me that his marriage to my daughter was on thin ice because of her continued defense of my cheating wife. I just have to wonder when my day is coming, Pop, he told me one night as we were drinking a few beers on my deck. She's got to know that what Mom did wasn't right, and I'm hoping she's just making this a show of support, as opposed to actually agreeing with what Mom did, Abel said. Twyla stopped by one evening with a bottle of Glenmorangie single malt and a 5,000-piece puzzle. I know you're not officially divorced, Rain, but there's a whole world of good women out there looking for a good guy like you. You should get out there and dip your toe into the pond, so to speak. I'm not saying you need to go full slot like your wife, but since you filed months ago, nobody, well, almost nobody, would blame you for trying to find some companionship, Twyla said. You know, it's too bad you don't have the writing bug like your late ex-partner did, because this whole thing would make one hell of a book. I mean, there's a whole bunch of details you don't know because your wife will never tell you, but you know more than enough to have the bones of a good fiction, and can fill in the rest from your imagination. Rain raised both eyebrows in acknowledgement. He then held up his phone and smiled. I know a little more than she thinks I know. My ex-partner liked to rub it in my face every now and then, I said. There was a threesome in Greece and a couple of Maori cops in New Zealand. I've got video of both. And you never told your attorney about that? She asked with a bit of a rebuke in her voice. I knew we didn't need them to get what we needed, I answered, looking Twyla directly in her eyes. Not that I'm a saint, though. I'm not saying I won't ever use them. It was Twyla's turn to raise her eyebrows. Every time we get together, I learn something new, she said. The more I thought about it, the more I had to admit I liked Twyla's idea to write a book. I had the time, after all, because all I had going on in my life was work. If Jax could do it, and I certainly knew he was no literary genius, then I knew I could do it, especially since I already had the bones of the story right in front of me. 2 months later, I was officially a free man. I made a reservation to my favorite restaurant and called Twyla, who was now officially no longer my lawyer. You remembered my number. How nice, she said when she picked up her line. I'm assuming you're calling to celebrate being a free man. You do realize that almost everybody calls me on Freedom Day. I guess I never thought about it, although it makes perfect sense, I responded. But how many of your former clients call you to ask you out for a date? I've got a reservation for Serrano's tonight at 7. I know it's short notice, but I didn't want to give you a chance to think about a good excuse to say no in a sweet way. But that doesn't give me a chance to go home and change into something nice for the date, she protested. You forget I know you always dress well for work, I responded. But I prefer to dress a little less loyally for my evenings out, she said. I'm pretty sure I can find something less loyally for drinks and dessert at my place afterward, I said. Well, then, how can I turn that down? She said. Knowing she was going to be dressed well, I put on my dark blue suit for my first date in more than 33 years. I have to admit I felt like I was a 16-year-old sophomore about to go out on my first date with Emma Wasaki. Now that I had thought about that, I remembered that I threw up about 15 minutes before I was supposed to pick her up. She had given me her address in the ritzy part of town, which didn't surprise me, considering she was a successful attorney living on her own since her divorce 15 years ago from a cheating spouse. What did surprise me was that she was hardly dressed like an attorney when she answered her door. She had on a low-cut maroon dress that finished a couple of inches above her knees, was fairly cinched in on her narrow waist, and seemed to flow with her as she moved. For the first time since I had known her, her auburn hair was down and flowed to just past her shoulders. Phew, I said under my breath, but apparently not too much under. I'll take that as a compliment then, she said with a happy lilt to her voice. I took off a little early to get ready. I'll admit to losing my cool for a minute. I blatantly looked her up and down like she was a steak and I was a hungry lion. I realized she was looking at me. I hope I wasn't drooling. I get it, Rain, she said softly. I know you're out of practice. I promise to take it easy on you tonight. I reached out to take her hand, and we were off. As she had shown me when she was my attorney, Twyla was engaging, funny, smart and intelligent. The evening was unlike any I had experienced in forever. No knock on Tracy in this case, it's just that we had such a connection for so long. Twyla was figuratively a breath of fresh air in my life. The evening ended with us in my bed, tired and sated. I want you to know I don't sleep with just anybody, and you're the first former client I've ever done this with, she told me. And, in case you're wondering, I again learned something new. I felt myself blush at what I hoped was a compliment. You are one hell of a woman. Can I call you again? I asked, knowing I sounded like a lost puppy. I will be crushed if you don't, she said. But I'll totally understand if you want to play the field for a while. No. How about we see where this goes? I know everybody would tell me to take my time, but why can't I take my time with you? If I like chocolate ice cream, why do I need to first try vanilla before I have a second bowl of chocolate? I said. Yeah, I actually said that, to my eternal shame. But she giggled, and then said she agreed. We made a date for the following Saturday night, which was my next day off. Writing a book was so far out of my wheelhouse that it was ridiculous. I mean, throughout my career I had written hundreds of reports, but that was the extent of my writing experience. I had never written anything in the world of fiction, either. Police reports were straight non-fiction. Just the facts, ma'am. No style. Grammar was nice, but not required. Fortunately for me, I had read my fair share of fiction, including all 6 of Jax's books. Like I said earlier, if Jax could do it. One advantage I had over Jax was that I had lived this particular story. Or at least a good amount of it. Yes, I didn't know Tracy's side of things, but then again, since this was fiction, I was really going to fiction the hell out of it. I tried to play above board and that didn't work. She turned my girls away from me. It was time for me to stop being a nice guy. That meant I was also going to use Tracy's additional extracurricular wanderings against her. Putting down the parts of the story that I lived was far from cathartic. In fact, it was downright hurtful. Sometimes I would write for 10 minutes and then get up from my desk and smash something, usually a coffee mug. When I smashed the last of my set of 8 crockery mugs, I went over to Walmart and found a set of hard plastic indestructible mugs. I was only able to destroy 6 of the 8 of those before finishing the first draft. One way I kept my sanity was to go over the top with my slut's adventures. In addition to her having sex with her dying duck buddy on the around-the-world trip, I had her do an additional 24 men, including the threesome in her Maori weekend, that Jax had texted me multiple photos of. Knowing Tracy the way I did, I was pretty sure that she had no idea Jax sent me those photos. I guess she'd find out. I had Twyla do my first read for me. Attorneys are usually pretty good with words. Also, I trusted her judgment on good taste. I knew there were going to be spots where I crossed the line, and I needed someone to reel me back in occasionally. The first thing she questioned was my choice of using Tracy as the name for the cheating wife in the book. She knew that truth is a defense against libel and defamation, but naming the second lead character after my ex-wife was almost inviting a lawsuit, which would still chew up money defending. And you would in essence be outing yourself as a cuckold, she said. You played it real close to the vest while she was traveling around the world cheating on you, but you would be shouting this from the rooftops if you do it this way. As much as anything, I did that trying to protect my kids, but since they jumped on Tracy's crazy train, I don't feel the need to be their offensive line. Bring on the blitzers, I said. After 6 months of dating Twyla, I knew I had found the woman with whom I wanted to spend the rest of my life, and she didn't hesitate to say yes when I asked. We had a small wedding 6 months later. I moved into her house, and life went on for both of us, except I had contacted Jax's publisher when I felt my book was done. I was not too proud to use Jax's name and my connection to him. It was the least my former friend could do for me. His publisher liked my first few chapters, and had me send the entire book to one of the company's house editors. She made 17,000 edits and had me rewrite 2 different chapters completely, but in the end, she was really enthusiastic about recommending the manuscript. I had my house attorney, the recently renamed Twyla Rainwater, negotiate some terms on my behalf, which in reality meant that we took their first offer because as a rookie, I had no negotiating leverage. I guess the industry calls what I wrote a bodice ripper. The audience is mostly women over the age of 40. Let's face it, nobody under 40 reads books anymore. Still, my ripper ripped through its first limited printing in several weeks, and the publisher tripled the run for the next printing. I'm not going to pretend to know the book industry, but the publishing company ran 3 more printings of my book in the next several months. It became a surprise bestseller. Who knew? How did you know about the threesome and the Maori guys, Ring? Tracy asked softly when I answered my phone a few months after the book release. I know most of what you wrote was just pure filth to get readers, but you definitely got 2 parts completely right, and I don't believe in coincidences. Who gave me up? A million thoughts went through my head at that moment. Being a good guy wasn't one of them. Your lover, I said harshly. Stupid Ducker sent me videos of both of those engagements. He just had to rub my face in your infidelity. Oh, God, no. I never meant for you to ever see that, she said. I'm sorry. I'm sure you are, I replied. I never rubbed it in your face. Never showed the girls, even when they defended you. But that's over. I will tell them the truth, show them the videos, when they ask. And they will. Is there anything I can do to get you not to show the girls those videos? She asked. There was, but you were not smart enough to do it at the right time. Now that time has long since passed, I commented. It took a week before my younger daughter called, and she was ripping mad. I know it's supposed to be fiction, Dad, but you knew when you wrote it that a lot of people were going to assume that's Mom, and you made her out to be the biggest slut ever. I thought better of you, Lori lectured me through the phone. Well, that wasn't all fiction, I said. Some of it was based on actual events. I know you don't want to hear it, so I'll just send you the videos of 2 of the events. I'll be waiting for your apology. Then you can send those videos to your sister, and she can apologize as well. I hung up and sent the 2 videos. Combined, they were about 30 minutes long. About 35 minutes later, my phone rang. I answered immediately without looking at the caller ID. I'm sorry, Daddy. I didn't want to believe Mom would ever hurt you like that. It was one thing to help Uncle Jax, but this was something else entirely, she said. Actually, baby, it wasn't one thing for her to help Uncle Jax. She cheated on me with him, and him being sick was not a good reason. She cheated on me because she wanted to. End of story, I spit out. I got the second apology about an hour later, combined with a lot of tears. I wished it didn't have to be that way, but it was what it was. I didn't become rich directly from the sale of my book, but I did when one of the big movie studios bought the rights to turn it into a movie. In fact, they gave me enough that I could retire immediately if I so wanted, and I did. The only reason I was still working was that the divorce delayed my retirement from the force by 3 years. The movie was made about a year later, and I was paid a handsome fee as a screenplay consultant. It took about 9 more months before the movie was released, and then shit really hit the fan. As Twyla explained to me, it was one thing to read the words. It's totally another thing to see the acts, a much worse thing, actually. Oh well, Dad, did you have to go that far? My older daughter asked over the phone. I'm pretty sure we've had this conversation before, I corrected. Your mother went that far. You're blaming the messenger. Again. Sorry, Dad, she replied softly. It's just that you've got a pretty good life with Twyla, and she's got not much. Her choice, babe. Actions have consequences. She chose to walk out the door for a fun-year trip around the world with a man not her husband. I loved her. I warned her. She didn't love me enough not to do it. For some strange reason, she thought she could have her cake and eat it, too. Hell, real life doesn't work that way. She destroyed my life. If I hadn't found Twyla, my life would be pathetic. Your mother made her choice and threw me away. Threw me away. I'm not wasting 1 second of my life worrying about how her life is turning out. She stepped in sheet. Why is she surprised that her life smells like sheet? The music in the background was starting to get loud. Carnival in Rio de Janeiro is sort of like Mardi Gras in New Orleans on steroids. Twyla and I had decided we needed to take our own trip around the world. I'm sorry, baby, but the music's getting too loud to keep talking. Give my best to everybody back home. I'll talk to you later, I said. We have reached the end of today's story, friends. Please show some love by dropping a like and comment, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to get updates every time we post new videos. Goodbye for now, and I'll see you in the next one.